Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're looking into Thinking Architecture by Peter Zumthor.
Oh, yeah, Zumthor.
You've heard of him, of course.
Yeah.
Incredible buildings.
Yeah.
Really intentional, almost poetic, you know.
Yeah. Very sensual.
But his book, it's not like a how-to manual or anything.
Yeah,
It's more
yeah.
like we're getting a peek into his thought process.
Yeah. His personal notes.
Like how he approaches design at its core.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, because we're working with both text excerpts and images, which is a bit unusual for a book like this.
It is.
I mean, some of these are just blank pages or super close-ups of, like, materials.
Right, what's the deal with that?
It's kind of strange.
Yeah, it's almost like he's forcing us to think differently about architecture.
Yeah.
Even how we represent it visually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive right in.
Okay.
Zumthor kind of lays down the law right off the bat. He says he's not into architectural theories. Instead, he's all about the wholeness of a building.
Yeah, he talks about master builders.
The tradition of master builders.
This is page 30.
Yeah, and it's so important because it really sets the stage for everything that comes after it.
Yeah.
It's like he's rejecting the idea of architecture as like purely intellectual or stylistic, you know?
Yeah.
He's looking for something deeper, something more fundamental.
It's like he wants us to experience the building with all our senses.
Yes.
Not just see it as this visual object.
Totally, yeah.
Like, think about the Thermivals spa in Switzerland.
Oh, yeah.
He uses this local quartzite in a way that you not only see its beauty, but you can, like, feel the texture.
Oh, totally.
Its weight.
Yeah, the weight of the stone, yeah.
The way those pools are designed, you hear the water cascading down. You feel those temperature changes as you move through the spaces.
Yeah. Yeah, he's creating like a symphony of sensations.
Wow.
This is what he calls the thing complex in action.
Okay.
You know, every little detail, every material is working together to create this really unified experience. So this thing complex, this isn't some abstract concept.
Right.
He actually compares it to music and literature.
Yes.
Like how individual notes or words create a larger effect.
Right, and that's such a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because it shows how connected everything is in his work.
Yeah.
It's not just visual harmony, you know?
Yeah.
It's about how light and sound and texture, even smell, all contribute to the overall feel of the space.
And this is where those images in the book get really interesting.
Yes.
Especially the ones that are almost minimalist.
Right.
Like that close-up of a stone wall and a pool of water.
I love that image.
Yeah.
What's so fascinating about those pictures is how stripped down they are.
Yeah.
There are no people, no distractions.
Yeah.
It's just material, light, and shadow. Like he's saying this is architecture at its core.
I wonder if that reflects his own design philosophy.
You think so?
Like Zumthor's buildings are known for being so understated, even austere.
Yes.
Maybe these images are like a visual echo of that.
Maybe. Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Some people say his buildings are too focused on this sensory experience,
Oh, really?
that he doesn't care about function. But I don't think that's accurate.
No, I think it's a misreading of his work.
Yeah.
He's not ignoring the practical aspects of architecture.
Right.
He's just raising that experiential dimension to the same level of importance.
So instead of asking, does this building work?
Right.
He's also asking, how does this building make you feel?
Yes, exactly.
He wants us to think about architecture in a more holistic way,
Totally.
to consider the emotional and psychological impact of the spaces we're in.
Yeah, and I think that's such a powerful concept, especially in a world that's so dominated by the digital distance. Zumthor is reminding us about the physical, the tangible.
Little sensory,
Yeah.
and those minimalist images.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a way of cutting through all the noise.
It's like he's saying, look at this.
Yeah.
Pay attention to this raw beauty of materials and light.
That's an interesting take.
It is, isn't it?
It's like he's giving us just enough to make us curious.
Yeah.
But then he steps back and lets our own imagination fill in the rest.
Yeah, I like that.
And maybe that's the whole point. He doesn't want to dictate our experience.
Right.
He wants us to engage with his work on our own terms. But to do that, we have to be open to the nuances of the space.
Right.
The way the light changes throughout the day, the texture of a wall, the sound of our footsteps.
Yes, and that's where his connection to nature comes into play.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about the Austrian writer Peter Handke and how Handke focuses on the factual complexity of details in nature.
That's on page 68.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if Zumthor sees a similar connection in buildings.
Like-
Like Handke sees it in the natural world.
Like each detail is meticulously considered.
Yeah, and it plays a role in the whole composition.
It's like he's saying a building can be as complex and nuanced as a forest.
Or a mountain range.
Yeah, and just like nature invites us to explore and discover.
A good building does the same thing.
So does Zumthor believe buildings should be more integrated with nature?
That's a great question.
Almost like they've grown out of the landscape.
Yeah.
We'll definitely come back to that.
We should.
What's clear so far is that Zumthor's approach is about slowing down, paying attention.
Yes.
Being present in the moment.
Absolutely.
He wants us to experience architecture with all our senses.
Not just our eyes.
It's like he's saying, don't just look at the building. Feel it.
Yes.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Sounds good.
We're back. And I'm still thinking about that idea of like feeling a building, not just looking at it.
It's powerful.
It's almost like he's taking architecture to this level of art that engages like our whole being.
I agree. And on page 73, he draws this parallel between creativity and the natural world.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's this prevalence for wholeness in both.
Yeah, that makes me think about his Bruder Klausfield Chapel.
Oh, have you been?
Have you been there?
Yeah, I have.
What's it like?
It's amazing. He built it using 112 tree trunks, stacked them up like a teepee shape, and then poured concrete over the whole thing.
Wow.
And once the concrete dried, they burned the wood away.
Oh, wow.
So you're left with this hollowed out space.
So cool.
With these textured, almost charcoal-like walls.
So you don't just see the chapel.
No.
You feel the weight of its construction, the history in those walls.
Absolutely. And that's what's so cool about Zumthor's approach.
Yeah.
He's not just like manipulating materials, you know?
Right.
He's engaging with them on a much deeper level.
It's like he's collaborating with nature.
It really is. Yeah.
Can I play devil advocate for a sec?
Sure.
If Zumthor is so focused on creating this like unified, holistic experience, does that leave any room for personal interpretation?
That's a great point.
Isn't part of the joy of experiencing architecture how different people can find their own meaning in the same space?
That's a really good question, and it gets to the heart of what makes Zumthor's work so fascinating.
Yeah.
He definitely has a strong vision, and he's meticulous about every detail.
Right.
But his buildings aren't static.
They're not like frozen in time.
Right. They change with the weather, even with the people in them.
So it's more about setting the stage.
Exactly. Yeah. Think of it like a composer writing a score.
Okay.
The notes are there, the structure's defined, but the performance changes depending on the orchestra, the conductor, even the acoustics of the hall.
And the audience.
Okay.
Each listener brings their own stuff to the music.
Absolutely.
So with Zumthor, it's not about saying, this is what you should feel.
No.
It's more about creating a framework for individual discovery.
I like that. Yeah, his buildings are like a spatial language.
Oh, that's interesting.
The textures, the light, the flow of space.
Yeah.
Those are the words. And we as visitors create the sentences with our movements, our thoughts, our feelings.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But to get Zumthor's language, you have to really be paying attention.
You do. You have to slow down and notice the details.
The subtleties.
Exactly. And I think that's why those minimalist images in the book are so important.
Yeah.
They force us to look deeper, you know, to find the meaning even when there's not a lot of obvious detail.
It's funny. We've been talking about how Zumthor wants us to feel a building.
Yeah.
But he also wants us to think about it.
He does.
To really engage with the design intellectually.
He's not anti-intellectual. He's just cautious about architecture becoming too theoretical.
Yeah, too out of touch with the experience of actually being in a space.
Exactly.
So why should anyone care about Peter Zumthor and his way of designing buildings?
Well, in a world that's increasingly virtual, Zumthor shows us the power of the physical world.
Right.
He proves that buildings can be more than just functional shelters. Yeah. They can be works of art that make us think and feel in new ways.
Yeah, that's what art should do.
Exactly. Make us see the world differently.
Zumthor's work is like a call to be more present.
Yeah, more mindful.
More aware of the spaces we inhabit.
And even in a simple room, you know, if you pay attention to how the light falls, the texture of the walls, the sound of your own breath, you might discover a beauty, a peacefulness you never noticed before.
I like that.
It's a beautiful idea, isn't it?
It is. Zumthor's architecture isn't just about buildings.
Yeah.
It's about how we experience the world.
Finding poetry in the everyday. I agree. He helps us understand that architecture at its best is a way for humans to connect with something bigger than themselves.
Now, I want to come back to something we mentioned earlier. Zumthor's connection to nature.
Right.
We talked about how he uses natural materials in really cool ways.
Yeah.
But is there a deeper connection there philosophically? Like, is he trying to build things that echo or reflect nature?
I think so, but in a subtle way.
Okay.
It's not about copying nature literally.
Right. Not just making buildings that blend in.
Right. It's more about understanding the principles behind how nature works, how things grow and evolve.
And then using those ideas in his designs.
Exactly. It's less about imitation and more about inspiration.
I see.
He talks about being drawn to the factual complexity of nature, like how a forest floor is made up of all these interconnected elements, each one with a role to play in the ecosystem.
That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think he sees the same kind of connection in his buildings. The way he uses materials light space.
Yeah.
It's all about creating balance and harmony, just like in nature.
You know, we've talked a lot about the Thurmaval Spa. But another great example of this is his Delneset Memorial in Norway.
Oh, yeah.
It honors the victims of the Vardø witch trials.
It's a powerful place.
It's this long wooden structure built on stilts along the coast.
Yeah, and inside there's a long, dark corridor with a single light bulb for each victim.
Wow.
The wind howls through the structure.
It sounds intense.
It is. It feels so raw and elemental.
Almost like it's part of the landscape itself.
Exactly, and that's what makes Zumthor's work so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just about how things look.
Right.
It's about creating spaces that have deeper meaning, that connect us to something bigger.
I'm still stuck on those blank pages in the book.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about how they might force us to slow down and pay attention.
Right.
But do you think there's something else there?
Like what?
Like, is he trying to show us the limitations of language? How words can't really capture the essence of a building or an experience?
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
And I think you might be right.
Like, Zumthor is so good at creating these sensory, almost visceral spaces.
He is.
But he also knows that words can fall short when you try to describe them.
Absolutely.
So maybe those blank pages are his way of saying, go beyond words.
Yeah.
Experience it for yourself.
Use your senses.
I think so. It's like he's saying, I can show you the door, but you have to walk through it.
I like that.
Maybe that's the big takeaway from thinking architecture.
What do you mean?
It's not a blueprint or a set of rules.
Okay.
It's an invitation to a journey.
Oh, I see.
A journey of discovery that's both intellectual and sensory.
Yes. It's a reminder that architecture at its best is an art form that can move us and inspire us and challenge us to see the world in new ways.
Before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
let's talk about something that's been on my mind.
Okay.
If Zumthor is so connected to nature, is he worried about the environmental impact of architecture?
That's a really important question.
Is sustainability a part of his work?
Well, while he may not specifically call his work sustainable,
Okay.
there's definitely a sense of responsibility toward the environment in his approach.
How so?
Well, for one thing, he uses local materials.
Right.
Like the quartzite at Thermivals.
Yeah.
That cuts down on transportation costs and emissions.
That makes sense.
He also uses natural light and ventilation really well.
Like the Kunsthausbrigens.
Exactly.
Those translucent glass panels let in so much natural light.
Yeah, they reduce the need for artificial light during the day.
Right. And beyond the technical stuff, there's this deeper respect for nature in his designs.
I agree. His buildings often feel like they belong in the landscape.
Like they grew there organically.
Exactly like his Zinkmai Museum in Norway.
Oh, tell me about that.
He designed these small, dark timber structures that cling to the edge of a cliff.
Wow.
They almost disappear into the landscape.
It sounds incredible.
It is, and that museum really shows his philosophy.
How so?
He's not trying to dominate the landscape.
Yeah.
He's working with it, respecting its power and beauty.
And in doing that, he's making buildings that are beautiful and environmentally responsible.
Exactly.
It's like he's saying true beauty is sustainable beauty.
That's a great way to put it.
So for our listeners, how can they apply Zumthor's thinking to their own lives, even if they're not architects?
I think it starts with being more aware of the spaces we're in.
Yeah.
Appreciate the materials, the light, how things are put together.
Slow down and really experience the built environment.
Exactly, not just pass through it.
And maybe ask ourselves, how can we live more lightly on the earth? How can we make spaces that are both beautiful and sustainable?
Zumthor shows us that it's possible.
Yeah.
And he inspires us to strive for that thoughtful, responsible design in every part of our lives.
So we've talked a lot about Zumthor's ideas, but there's something we haven't really addressed.
What's that?
The cost.
Yeah.
His buildings are not exactly known for being budget-friendly.
That's true. His attention to detail, the materials he uses, the level of craftsmanship.
It all adds up.
It does, and it raises a question,
Yeah.
Is this kind of architectural excellence only for the wealthy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can Zumthor's ideas be used for affordable housing, public spaces, or even everyday objects?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is yes.
You do?
But it requires a change in how we think about it.
Okay.
It's not about copying his style exactly or using the same expensive materials.
So what is it about?
It's about understanding the principles behind his work and finding ways to apply them in different situations with different budgets.
So maybe it's less about the materials and more about the thinking that goes into them.
Exactly. Like, think about the shelters for a Roman archaeological site in Chur, Switzerland.
Okay.
He used simple wooden planks for those protective structures.
Oh, yeah, I've seen pictures.
They're both functional and beautiful.
Yeah.
They blend into the landscape perfectly.
And they're so light and transparent.
You don't need fancy materials to create a powerful experience.
You don't?
It's about understanding what even simple materials can do.
I see.
And it's about paying attention to the details.
Right.
How things fit together. How light plays on the surfaces.
And these are things you can do on a smaller scale.
Absolutely, even in your own home.
So what's one thing our listeners can do if they're inspired by Zumthor?
Start by really looking at the spaces you live in.
Okay.
Notice the light, the textures, the sounds. How do those things make you feel?
And then
Start small, rearrange your furniture, add a plant, try different lighting.
just little things.
Exactly. See how those small changes can completely change how a space feels.
Become more aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, and realize that even tiny details can have a big impact.
Maybe thinking like Zumthor can help us find beauty in the everyday.
Absolutely appreciate the simple things, the way light comes through a window, the feel of a handmade object, the sound of rain on the roof. Those are the things that make life rich.
As we wrap up this deep dive, there's one quote from Zumthor that keeps coming to mind.
Which one?
He says, "I believe that architecture today needs to reflect on the tasks and possibilities which are inherently its own. Architecture is not a vehicle or a symbol for things that do not belong to its essence. In a society that celebrates the inessential, architecture can put up a resistance, counteract the waste of forms and meanings, and speak its own language."
That's from page 11.
Yeah, it's such a powerful statement.
It really is. It makes us think about what architecture is really for.
What its role should be in society.
Exactly, and how it can push back against consumerism and all that superficial stuff.
It's a call to get back to basics.
Yeah.
To focus on space-light materials.
And the human experience.
Yeah, Zumthor's work shows us that architecture is not just about buildings.
No, it's about creating spaces that connect us to something larger than ourselves.
That's a pretty amazing legacy.
It is, and it's one that will continue to inspire architects and designers for years to come.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Peter Zumthor's world.
It's been fun.
We hope it's inspired you to see the places around you in a new way and appreciate how much architecture can shape our lives.